Good morning and welcome to CIO News. I'm Afreen Khan, your host for the broadcast and head of operations at CIO News. This is our exclusive fireside chat by GoTo specifically for healthcare industry. This is a recorded session and will be available on our website cionews.co.in and our CIO News LinkedIn handle. I'm very excited to invite my guest today, Ms. Mitali Biswas, who is the CIO at CK Birla Hospital. She is a strategic technology leader who has worked with leading industry names like PwC, IBM, and now CK Birla. She possesses a successful track record of over 20 plus years of leading enterprise IT operations, digital transformation, and data analytics. Also, I have with me Ms. Natasha. She is a remote support group lead for APAC at GoTo. She incorporates her 14 plus years of IT sales, customer service, and technical experience to bridge the gap between a customer problem and a product offering. As a product specialist for the remote support group suite, she plays the voice of the customer internally at GoTo and the face of remote support products for their customers. Her unique insight into IT consumer trends, knowledge of the APAC geography, and passion for technology guarantees an interesting conversation. So, I welcome both of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Afreen.
Great. So, to begin with, Ms. Mitali and also Natasha, so I'll go with Ms. Mitali first. What does your typical role look like working in the post-COVID era?
So, if I talk about the healthcare industry, I think COVID has done one good thing. It has accelerated the adoption of technology in healthcare. Pre-COVID area, the budgets for IT or even the technology adoption, nobody was much bothered about. Healthcare as an industry is far behind compared to BFSI or a manufacturing when it comes to technology. So there's a lot of journey to cover. I think from a COVID point of view, it has been able to let make people understand how important technology is for healthcare. So from that point of view, I think the life has been really busy after COVID as a CIO for looking after the hospitals. Lots and lots to do. We are on a digital transformation journey, but I think it's a long journey to cover in every area, be it network, be it infrastructure, be it our applications, cyber security, which is a very important topic now. So I think we are working on all the fronts and looking forward on this journey.
Great. So, I have the same question for you, Natasha, as well. So, how has it been for you working in the post-COVID era?
Yeah. So as you rightfully mentioned, Afreen, I represent GoTo. We've been in the, I'm sorry, excuse me, we've been in the industry for 20 years now, and we started as a remote support technology company, right? We started off offering IT solutions for remote working 20 years ago. Um, so during the COVID and with in this post-COVID era, we've decided to taste our own medicine in a way, no pun intended, but we've decided to adopt a hybrid work culture from 2020 onwards, right? So it's been completely hybrid. We've still got our offices in a few locations, but we still work remotely and we go into the office, once a week, twice a week based on requirements. And I think, like, ma'am rightfully said, working with industries across the world, in adopting remote support technology over the last 20 years, we did see that acceleration happen over the last 2 years, right? That it grew the most, the utilization on our products being remote support technology, it grew by 1,000%, right? So, be it on our collaboration tools or our IT support tools, it just grew like crazy. And the adoption also was in different industries which were not traditional IT industries, like the healthcare, manufacturing, retail, pharma, even education, even. So a lot of industries which were not very technology centric, they started adopting technology, and they've also moved into hybrid working, digitization, migration to the cloud, all of that have become commonplace for them. And so I think the COVID has been a boon, in certain areas, as well as, as we all know, in its own ways, it's had its pros and cons.
True. I actually kind of, just adding to both of you, all that you said. Yes, post-COVID era, it has definitely, given a boost to the technology adoption across industry, and be it, the IT industry or healthcare for that matter. I think the kind of adoption and the consumption of technology that has gone up in the post-COVID era has been remarkable. So, Ms. Biswas, coming back to you, as you rightly mentioned, that particularly for the healthcare industry, because it has, increased the technology demands, given the demands of today's distributed workforce, so it has definitely become imperative to scale up and arm the IT teams with the right tools. So, what have been the demands of your IT ecosystem on this front?
So if you look at healthcare, you have to look at differently compared to the other industries. So when this pandemic came, I think we were the only exceptions where we had to be in the hospitals. I mean, we were most busy then. The nurses, the clinicians, they cannot operate remotely. They have to be there in the hospital. And since they are there, we have to be here to support them. So lockdown, no lockdown, at least the core hospital team, we were here on site. Hybrid was an option, wasn't an option for us. But what we did was, the partners that I worked with, for example, they all went remote. Uh, Traditionally, the hospital was also used to working with those partners also on site. So I think that was a big change that happened. And another change was, although the most of the hospital staff was working from hospital, a lot of them were also infected with COVID, right? And then how do I empower them to do their job remotely? For example, if I talk about radiologists, the reporting had to be done, right? I mean, and they had to, but since they were all okay, but since they were infected with COVID, they couldn't be in the hospital. So how do I make that technology, through technology, available that they could see the reports and still do the reporting? So we had to do those changes. Teleconsulting, patients couldn't come in, but we still had to consult. How do we get that technology platform in for the hospital? So I think that was the change from a healthcare point of view. Equipping, my workforce, mainly the working workforce, with technology so that they can still do the work in spite of the pandemic hitting in.
True. And also, just to kind of, I'll have follow-up question there. We know that equipping your IT workforce is one piece, but because it was a very, very sensitive phase for all of us, there was definitely an increased pressure on the healthcare industry to ensure that sensitive personal and health information is protected and the access to that data is particularly restricted only to authorized personnel. So, are you confident with your current setup, your remote support software, if there is any, that your data is secure, and are these also these technologies which are compliant with HIPAA, GSPR, PII, or PHI?
See, nobody can be 100% confident. It's like securing your house. You do your best, but you can't say there'll be no theft, right? Because the technology, the hackers are also getting smart and smart. So it is one of the highest priorities for us, cybersecurity. And since the data that we deal with, very sensitive data, the patient healthcare data, it cannot be more sensitive than that. We also are, taking a strategy to move to cloud, and then it becomes a question that how do you protect your data on cloud? So we're looking at all the different layers. We are looking at the endpoint security, which are the users devices. We are looking at the network infrastructure to make sure that all the data exchange happens in an encrypted way, and through a proper network. And then we are also looking at the application security level, that how the data is stored, who has access to that data. So we have been working at all the levels. Every year we have been investing a lot on cybersecurity. But as I said, nobody can be 100% sure, because you have to constantly keep refining on what. And another, just not technology, I think another point that we have to think through is the user awareness and training, because that's one challenge I face in my hospitals, because majority of workforce is nurses and technicians. They don't understand the importance of cybersecurity, right? WhatsApp, it's used, very easily to share data. So to just, to make them aware, keep harping, no, this is not the way you should do it. This is how you should do it. Use the, the licensed versions. Don't use this. Don't use that. I think that's one of the biggest challenge I face. To keep, to make them aware about cybersecurity, what to do, what not to do. It's a very high priority for us, and with the data protection bill coming in, I think it's going to be more important going forward. So we are already on that path. Every year, there's a big investment around cybersecurity, and we are there are a lot of protocols in place, technology is in place, and as I said, a lot of focus also on the user awareness and training.
So I think the point on the user consumption and the emphasis on security, that makes me come back to you, Natasha. Same question for you. Like security, because it is one of the top priorities across organizations. What do you think are the standards by which an IT support tool should adhere?
Yeah, before I get to that, I like totally want to agree with what Mitali mentioned, which is no matter how many security locks you can lock your door with, I think the human element is the weakest link in that whole chain, right? The human beings involved. Like for example, we used to, have this joke in the office where, we go through so much of security training and all of that, but we have our access cards. We are trained on not, being able, not disclosing customer data, patient, like employee data with colleagues, with strangers, with people that we meet. But then at the end of the day, what we do is we write our passwords on a sticky note and we stick them on our laptops, right? I think no matter how much of security policies the company tries to implement, I think at the end of the day, it's the human element where we as a human being, we need to be conscious of every activity that we are doing, right? If that's going to open up our data as well as our company's data to risk, password hygiene and all of that awareness. So yeah, I definitely agree with everything Mitali mentioned. But coming into talking about remote support technology, given that that's our domain, that's where we've had the last 20 years of experience, and we're serving a lot of the top healthcare brands in the world today. Obviously, due to uh, you know sensitivity, I cannot name them, but we are well versed in the protocols that are involved in the healthcare industry when adopting remote support technology, right? Because like Mitali mentioned, right, security is a top priority for industries across the world. But I think when it comes to healthcare, it is non-negotiable, right? It's not just a check in the box. It's not just a one of the mandates. It is the mandate, right? It has to be implemented as the first priority, and then everything else comes second, right? So like all the compliances that you mentioned, HIPAA, GSPR, and all of that, we are well familiar with that. And our tools, our remote support technology, we've tried to adopt these compliances, as well as if it is not relevant to our technology, we've tried to be in support of those compliances and not go work against it in that ecosystem, right? And also when it comes to remote support technology, I think how your IT technicians or the IT staff in a healthcare setup access remote support technology is extremely important. Imposing those restrictions to what they can do and what they cannot do, what they can see and what they cannot see, what they have access to, all of that is extremely important, because what technicians can or cannot do can make or break your compliance, right? So that remote support tool which you're using, as simple as it is, as a small part of that ecosystem that it is, it serves a huge it can be, it can be a risk in your compliance as well, right? So restricting agents access to providing only the remote support getting access to remote machines, that is the nurses machines, the doctors machines, the physicians laptops, desktops, their tablets, their iPads, their mobile phones, but on a limited restricted access control, right? So maintaining that control very tightly is extremely important, but at the same time, enabling them to provide all the support that's required, right? Being able to resolve that issue, being there present virtually, remotely to when it's needed, as and when to gain access to that diagnostic information, the background IT, whatever is happening on that machine, understanding it, getting as much information as possible to diagnose an issue and resolve an issue, but at the same time, not too much that it goes beyond what's required, right? So I think it's a thin line between enabling them as well as restricting them, but I think the right remote support technology should be able to provide you that control.
Correct. And from the inputs that both of you actually gave, I think the very, very important factor when it comes to security is definitely the human factor which is involved, because that's the most uncontrollable piece. No matter the technology that you kind of enforce and the multi-factor authentication process, etc., it's always the human adoption which will always be the key to having all of this in place. And educating them, making sure that they are actually adopting what is taught to them, and they are also as aware and serious about the security piece as the technology leaders are concerned about. So that definitely is a very, very key thing. And Natasha, as you also mentioned, that giving them the required remote support, that is very, very important, because at the end of it we know that not everyone is tech savvy, not everyone knows what to do when they're stuck in technological situations. So Ms. Mitali, coming back to you on that note, that most of the time an organization's productivity actually suffers because of a lack of technical assistance, to be precise, while operating from a distant location. Now, I understand in the case of a hospital, there might not be a lot of staff working remotely, but also, there will always be certain functions which might go out for field trips, or people who just be representing the hospital on behalf, going to rural areas. So in these situations, how have you been managing the kind of functioning of these remote support groups, and also how technology has been a helping hand in managing these scenarios?
See, when it comes to remote, I think the major challenge we had was when we launched our telemedicine platform. It was the need of the hour for when COVID stuck in. Suddenly it became, it was in the digital transformation roadmap, it was probably 2 years down the line, but suddenly became the most important priority. So we launched it. Thanks to cloud, we were able to launch it in a very short time. But the problem was not with our network; it was with the patient's network. So what happened? I would say there were a couple of cases where I got frantic calls from the doctor saying, "What platform you have given? It doesn't work." I said, "What happened?" I am not able to see the patient. As itself, telemedicine is very difficult. I mean, they are not very comfortable. Most of the doctors, they want to see the patient physically, and then you gave me a technology platform where I am not able to see the patient. And then when I dived in, the network was all fine. So then I called up the patient myself, asking what was the problem. And then they said they were from a remote area in a district. The network there was not up to the mark. So it's just not the hospitals that need to do their part, right? If we have to make this a success, and with the condition of healthcare in India, the doctors to patient ratio, it's about 1:2000 roughly. Only technology is the platform which can bridge this gap, because we don't expect the doctors to suddenly go to the rural areas. But if we have to do this, it's just not the hospitals or the healthcare providers working on the technology. Probably the government has to do its part to make those areas accessible with high network, because again, healthcare is an area where there is no room for any mistake, right? I mean, unless the doctor, of course, sees the patient, sees everything, sees his vitals, he cannot diagnose. So I think our major area mainly, it has been a bit different from the other industries, I would say. It was mainly the way we faced challenges in terms of connecting to our patients who were not able to come to the hospitals, right? So I think that's where we faced a lot of challenges, and I wouldn't say that we've solved it, because it's not for us alone to solve. And we saw the doctors easily switching to WhatsApp call, because That most of the time worked, but again, that had its, of course, the security restrictions. But that's the biggest challenge, I think, to get to use the technology platform. They did not trust us because, of course, it did not work because of other reasons, as I said. So that has been my biggest challenge, and it is still a challenge. I wouldn't say I have solved it.
Um, yes, of course, when it comes to connectivity, I think you have a platform, but if the connectivity is weak, it doesn't work at the, probably the patient's end. It really doesn't make sense, even if the platform exists. So, yes, well said, ma'am. I think the technology piece, the enforcement across the country from all directions is really required for this to kind of function as an end-to-end seamless engine. So, Natasha, what do you think? I think you've actually covered this, but then I still would want you to add more. Like when it comes to the top priorities, from your point of view, what are those top priorities when considering remote support solutions?
Yeah, I think like Mitali said, I think I'd like to agree again, being the the not just making sure that the technology is right for the caregiver, but or the provider, but also the receiver, right? The technology being ready, the patient being prepared with the right technology and having the right devices in place, the right network, the right systems, allowances, approvals, all of that in place, right? Technology is an enabler if you allow it to be, but for that you need two hands to clap to make that happen, right? And I think our remote support technology as part of GoTo is part of that equation in enabling that formula between a doctor, between a patient, or in any other industry, right? Between a customer and an end user. I'm sorry, between an IT agent and an end user, between a salesperson and a customer, right? That equation, technology is definitely the enabler or the device that's used, but and remote support technology allows for that device to run smoothly, to not have any issues, to be able to get in and fix those issues when there is an issue that's potentially going to be triggered, or reactively resolve that issue, right? So that remote support technology should have that capability to be alerted to potential issues as well as react to issues when there is an issue, and then get in there and offer the IT technicians with the right features within that tool to resolve that in a few clicks, within a few seconds or minutes, and get out of there, so that the doctor, the practitioner, the nurse, whoever it is, can do their work, right? So the time to resolution, speed is extremely important. And then, like I said, right, security is of course a no-brainer. It has to be the first priority when adopting any technology in a healthcare setup. But also, I think customizing that IT support workflow, it's a non-traditional IT support workflow. It's not as simple as it is in a software company or in an OEM, for example. It is extremely complicated. It needs to be customizable, right? And it needs to be customized, keeping security as the priority, right? For example, you're supporting doctors' machines, nurses' workstations. These are practitioners who are not at their machines, right? They are not always sitting in front of their computers, in front of their systems. They are on the floor. They are walking about. They're talking to people. They are dealing with so many different kind of scenarios in a day, which is not tied to their machine. So the remote support technology should be able to support those machines even when that practitioner is not present at that machine, right? So it should be, even if it's manned or unmanned, it should be able to support that device, right? Being able to troubleshoot it, transfer files from one device to the other, provide operating system support on operating systems across the ecosystem, right? Whether it's iOS, whether it's Android, whether it's Windows or Mac or whatever it is, right? As well as these machines are connected to larger physical devices which run your scanning, which does your monitoring, which does all of that, right? Which are the largest machines used for the diagnostic, right? So, and that is extremely important, that these machines, which are software related, there is no downtime, right? Because even a second of downtime could cause the whole place, that whole set up to run into large scale issues, right? Where that whole the medical practitioners' work itself gets impacted, right? So these machines should be supported completely. The uptime needs to be maintained. The remote support technology should offer the uptime of 99.99% in all cases, right? We cannot even have a minute or more than that of downtime, as well as allow for onboarding, right? You've got your technology like Mitali mentioned, which is your telemedicine technology. You've got your electronic medical records, which is used, right? So all of this software, which is new for medical practitioners, getting them onboarded to use that technology, right? They are not very, they are clinically trained, but they are not tech savvy to that extent where if there is an issue, if it stops working, they would know how to fix it and get it back online, right? Like Mitali mentioned, she had to call the patient to figure out that the network was poor on the patient's end, right? But when something goes wrong and there is um, a medical diagnosis in session, right? When there is care being provided from a doctor to a patient, that's a very sensitive time period, right? You cannot allow for any break in that experience, right? And so getting these practitioners onboarded on technology remotely, right? And being there as a backup for when this technology goes down, when there is an issue they are facing, when they are unable to plug it in, when unable to turn it on. Remote support technology plays a huge part, right? So all of this, I speak from experience where we've worked with a lot of hospitals and a lot of diagnostic companies to get the remote support rightfully built in their setup, with all of this kept being kept in mind. So that's speaking from my experience.
Very rightly said, Natasha. I think it's not just the remote support piece for people who are outside the hospital, but it is also to do with the doctors and nurses who are on the move, on the floor, and how their devices need to be connected, because ultimately technology flows throughout the hospital with through the machines, the reports, and everything. So yeah, it's also supporting those pieces. And with that, we actually come to the end of our session. And to just close that, Ms. Mitali, any last thoughts or best practices that you would like to share for our viewers?
I think best practice basically keep learning, be aware. I think it holds true for everybody, whether part of technology, not part of technology. It's flowing at a very rapid pace. So keep learning. I think that's what I can say. And thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure being part in all women session, which is normally doesn't happen. So thank you.
Yes,
Pleasure is ours.
likewise.
Natasha, as you know, anything from your end would you like to add to conclude?
Not really. I think, it was like Mitali mentioned, a pleasure to speak to and to understand from Mitali's perspective as well, what's happening on that end. I think from the technology side, we only see one side of the world, right? We are so, but when we look at, what's actually happening on the floor in a larger setup, that gives us a lot more insights to take back to our product, to build into our roadmaps, to consider when we are building technology, right? So I think it's been very insightful. Thank you so much for all the insights, Mitali, and thanks for giving us the opportunity, Afreen. It's been great.
So thank you so much, both of you. It was really nice interacting with the two of you. And yes, as Ms. Biswas rightly mentioned, an all women session, it always is a different experience. So yes, thank you so much.